Who are witches, pagans, and druids? Images of green-skinned women hovering around a boiling cauldron come to mind. Now, they used to be noble spiritual advisors. Why did they become so despised and hated? We will find out on this episode of Paranormal Truth. I'm Linnea Quigley, and you're watching Paranormal Truth.
Hello, my name is Patrick Allen, and this is Linnea Quigley's Paranormal Truth, a series of films where we delve into the paranormal world of the unknown. In this episode, we are going to investigate the scary world of witchcraft. Who are witches, pagans, and druids? What are their secret rituals? Can one harness the power of nature, or is this just a creation of those who long to dance naked amongst the trees by the light of the moon? Witchcraft is the practice of magical skills, spells, and abilities. Witchcraft is a broad term that varies culturally and societally, and thus can be difficult to define with precision. Historically, the most common meaning is the use of supernatural means to cause harm to the innocent. This remains the meaning in most traditional cultures worldwide, notably the indigenous cultures of Asia, Latin America, Africa, the African diaspora, and indigenous nations in the Americas. One of the most important venues to the witchcraft community is in Cornwall, England, the Wicker Museum at Boscastle. The Museum of Witchcraft and Magic is a museum established in 1951 that aims to shed a light on the long history of magic, witchcraft, and the world of the occult. In the small cottage that lies on the quaint harbor of Boscastle is a museum that has over 10,000 artifacts, from talismans, ancient goddesses, paintings, witch trial equipment, brooms, books, and curiosities. You can find nearly everything related to the mystical and supernatural, as well as owning thousands of magic-related artifacts. It's now been recognized as a valuable education center. It acts as a bridge of understanding and acceptance of something not always widely understood.
Magic is one of these traditions. It's a very important part of our culture, and it has often been written out of ordinary histories.
People come out of here having learnt something and having enjoyed themselves.
Power of wind have I over thee. Power of flame have I over thee. Power of wave have I over thee. Power of earth have I over thee.
It was started by an interesting character called Cecil Williamson. Ran in the Isle of Man for several years, along with another chap who later became quite well known, a chap called Gerald Gardner. And then in 1960 he came here to Boscastle. We've been here ever since. Witchcraft isn't Satanism, it's not devil worship.
This connection between folklore and witchcraft, you know, witchcraft isn't all robes and dancing in the moonlight, it's everyday stuff that people have done for hundreds and hundreds of years.
Give you a medicine made out of herbs, but also tell you to throw herbs onto the fire. Nettle out, dock in, dock remove the nettle sting.
Return. The earth, the air, the fire, the water, return.
There is an inherent magic in ordinary natural objects.
The open door. Spells alive. By knot of six.
go out on a windy day and tie 3 knots in a cord and knot the wind into the cord and then sell the rope to sailors. And then when they needed a fair wind, they would untie one of the knots.
By knot of 9, the thing is mine.
Using a lot of poetry and imagery, even when you're using natural objects. It's the way that you kind of connect the spiritual and the artistic.
Crystals in general, like this wonderful crystal of Osman Spare's. Dark mirrors. We've got a lovely dark mirror of Cecil Williamson's downstairs. Mirrors that are not fully reflective. And they were aids, they're tools to help you enter into a state of mind where you're open to the spirits, the demons. It is the most talked about item in the museum. This is what most people think of when they think of witchcraft, of course, is dolls with pins in. Involving putting parts, fingernails, hair cuttings and that in of the person to be cursed in the pocket. There's names and addresses of people written on them.
I shall go into a hair with sorrow and sighing and mickle care.
They're some of the most magical items in the museum, and I think they ooze magic. Because if you heard the mandrake scream, you'd die.
We invoke the Queen of Queens, Areda, Areda.
Great place for the modern witch to come and learn not only what went on in the distant past, but in the relatively close past as well.
Grant us peace and grant us love. Lead thy children here below.
Awful lot of people come to see Crowley's Chalice. The man had a huge influence on an awful lot of people, and you couldn't call it witchcraft, but the museum is wider than witchcraft. This is magic.
I think that's an interesting thing.
This one piece will make 52 layers.
Watch on mobile devices or the big screen, all for free. No subscription required. Download Veely now.
Told me of his collection in Holland, and we ended up going over to see it. And later, when he died, the collection was left to us. And it's this fantastic collection of magical artifacts of which we know very little.
Magic is constantly changing, and yet at the same time it actually has roots which go back a very long way.
But we don't know. As with a lot of the stuff in this museum, I think one of the lovely things about magic is we don't understand it, certainly don't fully understand it, and we don't know why certain emblems, certain symbols are used. They just are, and we just have to accept that these things are magical.
At Boscastle in Cornwall, on the quay where the witches used to whistle up the wind, there is a witch house full of curious objects, including a tableau depicting the Black Mass. Its owner is Cecil Hugh Williamson, who gives his own account of what goes on behind the scenes of a seemingly innocuous organisation.
Today, we have got this very sound and practical system, which after all is the basis of all spy systems, and any Russian person running an intelligence service, or German or French, would recognize it at once. You've got the cell system, where the cell works, but it has its link man. So, you can imagine this scene. As a local coven of a district has its meetings every once in a while, and so what happens is that you find a group of people making tracks to the meeting place, but they don't all drive there and arrive and fill up a car park. No, for secrecy and security, what they'll do is they'll go in their Austin 1000s or what have you, and they'll gather at, if there's a lot of them, they may use 2 pubs, so that you have no more than 5, 6, 8 people meeting at a pub at this end of thing. They'll leave some of the cars there and go off in 1 or 2 cars, and they will then drive off to this country house or maybe a farmhouse. And in appearances, it's exactly what it is, a pleasant house, living in the country, possibly retired people, nicely kept gardens, cars will drive up. Any locals will say, oh, well, Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so are having a little cocktail party and get together. Eventually one of the people will come and say, well, quieten down, everybody, he's arrived. By the word he, they refer, of course, to the man in black, the coven leader. Now, the coven leaders sometimes is seen, but very rarely these days. The system is practically the same everywhere, is that there's a door which is left open and leading into the room where the guests are assembled. People quieten down, shade the lights down a little bit to a quiet light, and a runner, which is the man in black's secretary or scribe, will make all the arrangements. He's like a major domo. And the major things they do is that when the preliminaries are done, they start about the business in hand today. Ever since the dawn of time, there have always been people that want things. They want somebody else's wife, they want health, they want youth, they want this, that, and the other. And the witch, as the word witchcraft says, they are in trade. It's a business. You pay your money and you get a result for it. And so with the witchcraft business and all the witches, they've always referred to their customers as wanters, because that is exactly what it is. If you can't get it in the shop down the street, if the law doesn't provide it for you, well, then you go to the witch. How do you join? Oh, that's probably the most common question that I'm asked. All sorts of people are dead keen to become witches and join witchcraft covens. Well, the short answer to that is you don't join. The witches select their replacements very, very carefully, and anybody with a little bit of common sense who sits down and gives it a little bit of thought will see why. After all, you're going into a most exclusive organization whose work, mostly for their wanters, is beyond the law. In fact, let's be blunt about it. You join a witchcraft coven and you may, almost certain to at some time, be a murderer or murderess. There are times in this world when people have said it, often in best of families, be better off if he was dead. That little sentence, if you think about it, is not an isolated or a rare thing. It's all too common. There are many, many women and men up and down the countryside who loathe and detest people. And they are the people who go to the witches and ask for that very useful, expensive, and practical service, elimination. How do they eliminate a person? Well, broadly speaking, there are 2 methods. One is that you use the practical things which are already on this earth. By that I mean you can poison a person or such like things. On the other, which is more interesting and actually the one they prefer to use, you make use of the spirit forces. Now that may sound a very tall order to you, but it comes in the category of mesmerizing a person, influencing their mind and controlling them. I'll give you an example. Shall we say there's a wife wants to get rid of a awkward, we use the word caddish husband, a blackguard. Well, he works in some place like most people. He has a car, probably on the way home he has a drink with the boys, and so the witch, having once received her commission, will get one of her runners to watch all his movements, and she finds that he goes into the Black Dog at such and such a time, and he has a drink there, and then he drives home, or he goes off to the house of his mistress or what have you. So the procedure is quite simple, is that arrangements are made for the witch to go to the pub, and she will be in the bar there, be quite close to the target, as you might say, and she can either speak to him direct, get to know him, or she can actually do it with her back turned to him. And what she does is she gives her particular spirit, and I ask you to believe this, because when you're talking about witchcraft, you do step into the world beyond, which the average person knows very little about, but it's so real. And she will instruct this spirit force to latch onto this fellow, and the instructions to it are very simple. She just says, make this man go to sleep in 15 minutes, or half an hour, whatever it may be, knowing full well that he'll finish his drink up, and he'll go out to the car park and get in his car and start to drive home, and he will black out.
Witchcraft has gradually evolved over time, and will continue to do so. Throughout the ages, the term witch has labeled healers, medicine men, seers, and every mystical practitioner in between. Not all witches worship the goddess, as witches are labeled as such in many areas, religions, and traditions of the world. Up until around 1020 AD, witches were seen in a positive light. Healers, wise ones, seers. Many of them also understood how to use plants and nature for healing, and used these skills to help others. All of that changed under Pope Benedict VIII. He executed the first heretic, a witch, in 1022. Thus, the burning times had begun, and would continue for over 753 years in Europe. People of all races, creeds, and religions, including children, were killed en masse throughout this time. Torture and death for witches was commonplace. One method was to find the witch's mark, which was a place on the body that felt no pain. Suspected witches were tormented with needles over every inch of their body, in an attempt to find the witch's mark and prove that they were a witch. Another method was to bind an accused witch's hands and feet together and throw them into a river. It was believed by James I that since water is a holy substance, it would keep witches pushed to the surface. Unfortunately, the accused would die either way. If they sank, they'd typically drown, and if they floated, they were burned at the stake. The burning times forced most real witches to practice in secret. Starting in 1930, there has been a slow re-emergence of witchcraft, of multiple traditions. The leader of the New Age movement of witchcraft is and was Gerald Gardner. In 1938, a 52-year-old ex-colonial gent called Gerald Gardner retired with his wife to the south coast of England. From the New Forest, Gerald Gardner would become England's most famous witch and form the religion Wicca.
Dr. Gerald Rosso Gardner is a qualified scientist. He is also a witch.
Is it not a fact that these meetings are really very largely sexual orgies?
They're not. Not in the least.
In 1954, a book appeared titled Witchcraft Today. It was written by a Dr. Gerald Rosso Gardner. In the book, Gardner said, in effect, what Margaret Murray suggested is true. Witchcraft was a religion, and in fact it still is. I know because I'm a witch. Finally, a practicing witch had come forward to give their side of the story, to start the long, hard job of restoring the balance. Gardner, after a lifetime of studying religio-magic around the world, finally retired and settled back in his native England. There, in the 1930s, he came into contact with what seemed to be one of the last surviving covens of the old religion. He was excited and delighted enough with what he found to want to run out and tell everyone how wrong they had been about witches. But he had to wait until the 1950s before he could do so. Gardner believed that the coven to which he belonged was one of the last remaining. He felt that the craft, witchcraft, really was on the edge of extinction. He was surprised and delighted when, on the publication of his book, he started to hear from many other covens across Europe, each of them in turn believing themselves to be the last alive. Gardner took over a museum of witchcraft and magic, started by Cecil Williamson on the Isle of Man, in the middle of the Irish Sea. It was housed in an old mill, itself for centuries associated with the local Arbory witches. This became his headquarters, and from there he put out a second book, complementing the first, entitled The Meaning of Witchcraft. Until his death on February the 12th, 1964, Gardner was rightfully regarded as the grand old man of witchcraft, being solely responsible for igniting the flame of Wiccan revival. All present-day Wiccans owe Gardner a deep debt of gratitude, for without his pioneering work in straightening misconceptions, it's doubtful the old religion will be back where it is today. With the revelation that Wicca was not only an organized religion, but a benevolent one at that, championing love and joy, many people came to see its tenets as refreshing and eminently sensible, and very much preferable when compared to the doom and gloom of modern-day Western religions. The return of the old religion had begun. I was myself responsible for introducing Wicca, Gardner's branch of it, to the United States, having been initiated by his high priestess only the year before he died. This was a time when there was no modern witchcraft visible in this country. Initially, Gardnerian, the name given to his modified form of Celtic Wicca, was the only form of the religion available. It took many years for others to gain courage from Gardner and from his example and to stand up and be recognized. But soon it became apparent not only that the craft was alive and well, but also, as with Christianity, that there were many different forms of the old religion being practiced and therefore available to the seeker. In recent years, there has been some dispute as to whether today's Wicca is truly a direct descendant of the old religion of pre-Christianity, or whether it is a much newer, 20th century-born variety, merely claiming lineage. This is a dispute that will probably continue for generations. I think it's unimportant which it is. The main thing is that present-day witchcraft is now a full-blooded, thriving religion, filling the spiritual needs of tens of thousands of people around the world. We live in an age of reason, when people are encouraged to think and choose for themselves. This is also, supposedly, an age of religious tolerance. Hopefully, we can confirm that by seeing Wicca finally become accepted for what it is, just another religious path that leads to the same center. And what of the future of Wicca? It still has a very long way to go to be generally accepted for what it is. Let's not forget that we have centuries of propaganda to overcome. Yet overcome it we shall, of that I'm certain. It will continue to be a long uphill climb, with plenty of temporary setbacks. But so long as there are Wiccans willing to work at educating Cowans, non-witches, and willing to keep straightening out the misconceptions, then one day, I'm sure, we'll finally win back our religious freedom.
Once the witchcraft laws were repealed in 1951, witchcraft started to grow more rapidly. Two main New Age groups emerged, one headed by Gerald Gardner and one headed by Doreen Valente. Gardner was the main influencer of the Wicca tradition until his death in 1964, and is still a major influencer. Valente has been just as important, however, as she wrote the Wiccan Read, and integrated beautiful poetry, lore, and mystique into commonly used rituals and spells. The number of people involved in witchcraft has continued to grow into the millions. Popular witchcraft authors such as Starhawk, Cunningham, Buckland, Telesco, and Ravenwolf have contributed to this modern-day resurgence. There still are a lot of misconceptions, and many witches still are not comfortable coming out of the broom closet. Though tolerance has slowly improved, it is still not even close to where it needs to be.
From ancient healer, priest, to scapegoat, witches have and will play an integral part in our society. I'm Linnea Quigley, and thank you so much for joining us for Paranormal Truth.